In this video, we want to show the class how we conduct a workshop at our own writers group each week. We will look at 2 poems and make comments on what works in the poems and what might need revision. Typically, anything you submit to the discussion board workshop for our class or anything you'd bring to a face-to-face writers workshop should be considered a work in progress. So the point of a workshop is for participants to give and to receive helpful feedback aimed at revision. The basic rules of the workshop are that the writer reads aloud the prose chapter or poem while members follow along with their own copies. The writer is not supposed to introduce or explain the work in any way or to make apologies for it. In a face-to-face workshop, the writer then listens attentively to what others have to say about the poem, takes notes, and joins the conversation toward the end of the discussion to answer or ask questions and to thank the readers for their help. However, in an online workshop, you and your classmates will carry on your workshop discussion by writing posts in the discussion board. The writer will then read your remarks and can add to the discussion, ask questions, and so forth. Eventually, the writer will be able to use your remarks in revising a piece, so it is important to be as specific as possible in your feedback. You can use our conversation in the video as a model for ways to write about a work. You'll notice that the first part of the discussion focuses on what the piece seems to be about, what's interesting, what is working in the poem. Then the workshop group raises questions and points out possible problems with the piece, looking at specific words, phrases, images, and lines. In order to be truly helpful to your classmates, you will need to do the same thing in your discussion posts. In this case, Professor Leslie Lachance will read the poems. The poems we're looking at today are by anonymous students who are not in this class.
Okay, so I'm going to read a poem entitled, How Do the Dreamers? How do the dreamers do it? With snakes, water, flight, no airplane, then fire and Freud who lost his cigar when you were looking for your keys in the forest? How do the dreamers deal with the dead mother who is crying over the burnt cake on your 8th birthday? I'm sorry, she says. I'm sorry, but I'm going now. And the dreamer wakes holding the missing piece of a puzzle. Grief, the doctor says. Here, take this. Okay, so I think this obviously is a poem in some way about dreams. And it's a poem about grief. Maybe it's a poem exploring the relationship between dreams and grief.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yeah, the second stanza is about a dead mother. The speaker in the poem explores the symbolic aspects of dreams in the first stanza. The first stanza makes a reference to snakes, which we associate with dreams. Also, dreams are often about flying.
Mm-hmm.
Snakes are phallic symbols, and there is a reference to Freud and his cigar in the following line. He said sometimes there is no symbolism at all, however, and a cigar is just a cigar. You know, Freud died of cancer of the jaw from smoking cigars, and I wonder if this might be related to the mother's death.
I thought of that right away. An example of what the reader might bring to the poem that the poet never intended.
Yeah, the poet might not have even known.
That's true. And the second stanza seems to be about something that really happened.
Really happened, yeah, there is that feeling. We're told in the creative writing process we can take liberties. We don't have to actually say exactly what happened as it happened. We're writing about something about what happened. So we want to avoid cliches, we want to avoid being melodramatic. Even if it really happened that way, the second stanza is melodramatic with the dead mother and the burnt birthday cake.
Kind of, yeah. So maybe a different account of something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm interested in the you in the first stanza. So I tell my students that second person references, right, you, in a poem, it sometimes makes it feel like they're addressing the reader directly, or they maybe are writing to or addressing some other person in their life, a friend, a loved one, yeah, some intimate other. And in this case, the you has lost keys in the dream, or remembers the burnt birthday cake. Could the you be the speaker in the poem, talking to herself in a way? You know how sometimes we do that when we talk to ourselves. We'll address ourselves as you silly person or something, right? Yeah. So I think it's interesting that the poem does that.
And in the second stanza, the second line, it says dead mother. I don't think that we needed the word dead there, because the whole stanza implies that the mother is dead. And the I am going now, it's something that we actually do have in dreams when somebody dies and remember that person.
And they come back, say, I'm going now. Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, the third stanza turns a corner for me when the dreamer wakes. The image of holding a piece of the puzzle implies some insight or understanding may have occurred in the dream.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what that insight is, but I think it's interesting that the doctor says, here, take this. Instead of allowing the person to grieve, you know, that we try to medicate ourselves out of the grieving process, right? And so I think what the poem is really trying to say at the end is that we need to grieve.
Right. We need to be allowed to grieve. That's the message with the ironic ending there.
Yeah. Now, talking about diction, I notice, or mechanics, I notice that when the mother speaks in the second stanza, the writer uses italics, but when the doctor speaks in the third stanza, italics are not used.
Yeah, and that's an inconsistency that would bother me a little bit in this poem. So I would ask the student writer to try to be consistent. If you're using italics for somebody speaking in the poem, use italics again for when the next person is speaking. I would say, so if we were going to sum this up, we would say that the poem is really strong on atmosphere and mood. It really creates that sense of dream, the dream narrative and dream logic. The allusions to Freud are kind of interesting. I would want to know, I would ask the poet, what did you know that about Freud? There are some cliche phrases, maybe some melodramatic things that could be eliminated. But overall, we think the poem has some good prospects.
Has potential.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Has potential, yes.
Yeah, okay. Are you all ready to have a look at the second poem?
Absolutely.
Let's
Yes.
take a look at When I Was Little. When I was little, my mom sang to me a song like an angel, a song I could see. Her words like a river that flowed to the sea said, God made the world for me and for thee. When I was little, my brother did play. We skipped and we shouted about every day. We built castles from blocks, did it our way, made up silly songs we still sing today. My mom and my brother are my whole life. They love me in joy, they love me in strife. Now I'm a mom, a sister, a wife. Our bond is too strong to cut with a knife.
Well, the speaker is describing her childhood. With a singing mother and a playmate brother, it seems like an ideal childhood.
Yeah, it really does. But some of the images here really are not working for me. For instance, how do we see a song? I have this image of like a Disney cartoon with little musical notes floating up into the air. And then you notice the next rhyme is see, S-E-A, right? But we only have a partial image here. Words like a river that flowed to the sea, I'm not really sure that makes good sense in the poem.
The platitude of God made the world for me is a mother's assurance, something to build on and revision if that's where she wants the poem to go in the first place. It seems like that's where she first kind of came with the landing. But instead, the poem moves on to a stanza about playing.
Yeah, and I don't know, some of the words are clearly chosen for end rhyme, and they don't always make sense. For instance, I'd like to know, I'd rather know what songs the mother actually sang, and actually maybe hear her voice in the poem, but the writer seems very interested mostly in just rhyming.
That's right. The writer is using the word "thee" that nobody uses nowadays in speech, and then strife that is not commonly used either, and just for the sake of rhyming.
Yeah, those are archaic words, right? The Thee. Yeah, it's not something I would advise a contemporary writer to rely on for diction. Also, she uses word inversion for the sake of rhyme. My brother did play. We wouldn't say my brother did play. We'd say my brother played, right? So that's archaic wording, and that actually goes back a couple of centuries, I think.
Right. Rhyming is challenging and can force the writer to make choices that don't advance the poem much at all. I often encourage students to revise with less rhyme, to experiment with line breaks as well, so that we don't have so much of a crutch in the end rhyme on each line, because these end rhymes are clunky.
Yeah. I think that it means that the writer ends up not putting so much thought into the poem itself, but just focused on the rhyme.
Yeah, in addition to that, and I agree with everything you are saying, almost every line in the poem is a cliche.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. There's a situation implied by the fact that the father's never mentioned. I'd like to ask the writer if her mother was raising her children as a single mother, and what that was like.
Right? That's potentially a point of interest there. Also, this kind of bothered me. She says, "My mom and my brother are my whole life." Yet further on in the stanza, we see that the speaker is married and a mom herself. So I kind of feel sorry for her husband and her kids if the mom and the brother are her whole life. You see, it just logically, it doesn't make sense.
Just to get some perspective on rhyming, I would like this writer to look at William Blake's The Chimney Sweep. It's in the same kind of rhythm and rhyme scheme as this, like a nursery song. It's in this, but it's about the terrible enslavement of small orphan boys to clean chimneys in London. And they were forced to climb up and clean London's chimneys because they were small enough to fit, and the work killed them. They would be covered with soot and go to sleep hungry and crying. But they're told by their exploiters that they'll be rewarded in heaven. And that's where this kind of saccharine rhythm and rhyme becomes very ironic, because we know that saying, "Oh, you're going to die." Yeah. Blake was furious about child labor and used the sing-song rhyme to draw the reader in, make the reader think, "Oh, I can enjoy reading this." And then, of course, the reader is stuck now with this image of these poor orphan boys being so mistreated, and suffering children is nothing to sing about. Blake and then Charles Dickens used literature, public-pleasing literature, to raise public awareness and pass child labor laws in England.
Yeah. I think Blake's poem is a really good example of a poem that rhymes but is also thoughtful.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. And says something important. I think this writer is still trying to figure out what she really wants to say in the poem. And I like your idea, Cindy, that she might explore the fact that the poem is kind of a portrait, say, of a single-parent family. I would tell the writer to focus more on specific actual images, real details from the mother's life, say, mentioning specific songs. You know, did the mother sing gospel songs, country songs? How did her voice sound, right? Or the writer could describe in more detail the kinds of things she and her brother did to amuse themselves. Like, as you said, things are kind of cliche in the poem. She talks about building castles out of blocks. Well, okay. I think we could see something more interesting there. I'd suggest, honestly, that the writer avoid using rhyme altogether, at least in the first draft, because it seems that focusing on rhyme is really what has distracted her from offering real details. So rhyme in this case is kind of a trap. It's a trap, right? So would you say maybe there are some good potential topics here in the poem, but there's really need for
a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, yeah. I think about stories of the creative writing professors who take a poem and will cross out every single line except for maybe one and say, "Okay, start your new poem with this line," and leave all the rest out. And so I might suggest some really deep revision here.
Yes.
I agree.
I
Absolutely.
agree.
Great. All right. Well, thank you guys for your feedback on these.